For me, when I think about systems change and any system, a system's just made up of people and individuals, and the system creates the same outcomes over time because individuals have particular behaviours that are built on mindsets, and mindsets are built on stories. And in the context of this continent and surrounding islands, non-Indigenous folk have been telling stories that are based off colonial mindsets within their spheres of influence since 1788. Our stories have rarely been centred within those contexts, our community perspectives, our values. So I really see the role of storytelling as integral to shifting the mindsets of non-Indigenous folk so that they give better, they redistribute wealth in ways that don't perpetuate harm and violence, and create more equity across the sector. When we look at storytelling, we also need to think about storytelling and the stories that mob hold and the stories that mob need to share within ourselves as well, knowing that the stories that we share are just as important, if not more important, than those we kind of amplify out into other perspectives as well and spaces. So I really see that storytelling has to be the heart of where we start in shifting the sector, both within centering First Nations stories in the philanthropic ecosystem, but also sharing more stories and yarns within our own communities about how within ourselves we've got the power and authority to really hold these philanthropic systems to account and do it in our own ways on our own terms.
We see Indigenous-led funds being quite critical for the future, being able to help self-govern, funding and shift the dynamic that's currently at play there, where it is obviously difficult to access the level of funding needing to repair and restore countries and build resilient communities. So we see Indigenous-led funds being able to draw the necessary funding and resources so they can be directed in each of the communities or in communities so they can be able to deliver on their plans and aspirations.
Indigenous-led funds are a great point of contact for larger funders who might have a national footprint, who don't have local relationships, but they're wanting to get down on a local level to have impact. Going to an Indigenous-led fund could be, a fantastic first step in terms of building local relationships as well, or utilising other people's relationships that are already existing to make sure that funding is getting where it needs to go.
There's so many sectors within our communities, be it health, education, community development, and these are all common themes. And workforce, they talk about this stuff a lot, but I feel like there's an underlining circumstance or better yet situation where we're not necessarily exploring. And I think like philanthropy might be, I'm not saying it could be the be-alls, but it can definitely be something that might trigger those types of conversations. Definitely it's in a position to resource those creative platforms. So there is creative dialogue that sits outside of the structures that we are sort of living in to allow us to talk and explore what are those ideas and what are the key areas that we as Aboriginal people want to be part of. And it includes all of the peoples in our communities, like our elders, our young people, working class, not so working class, those that are running businesses, those that are not running businesses, because all of these things sort of exist, but I don't think we necessarily network and communicate in a way that is empowering. And a lot of things that are designed and put in a way for us to, rise above is written in a deficit type of language, and it's written in a way as if we don't have self-determination. But I sort of feel like, well, we're living proof that we are determined and resilient and all of those words. But I think what we need now is we need a platform to elevate us to another level so that the communication and the designs and all of that stuff that's coming from what people have been saying for a long time is now being put into practice. And I think philanthropy has that ability to do that. It has the ability to empower or inject resources in a way into our communities that could lift them to another level.
Within the money that we receive, we built a component of it to be able to build capacity, and that's direct investment into communities. It's not a lot of money that we use, but it's enough to be able to have sound relationships and see better outcomes in terms of capacity and capability within organisations and communities that we work with. So that's the changes that I see in some of those communities, going from totally unempowered to be empowered, and then seeing the outcomes and the joy and sense of pride that you see in those communities is really heartwarming, and it touches you in a different way in regards to sort of self-satisfaction as well in the job that I do, and working with those groups and seeing the outcomes and how we're changing people's lives.
We've made a commitment to fund First Nations organisations, and we would love to see more of those coming through, understanding where the opportunities are, how we can help. So visibility is going to be really important to us, and we think that IFIP can play a really big role in enabling that visibility to come through. I think we would love to see more Australian Indigenous-led funds emerge, and whatever role that we as Philanthropy can play in building the capacity, building their networks, securing their funding, I think is going to be a way for us to lean meaningfully into the space in a way that we haven't been able to before.
One of the biggest impacts philanthropy can do is actually transferal of wealth. So actually getting funds and money from within foundations out to communities who hold the solutions and the knowledge and the expertise to do great work in their communities. So we should be building relationships and building understanding and everything else, but I think most importantly we actually need to give up our power and privilege and share it across with communities that hold the power of culture and connection to country.
The role of the Australian Working Group, which is made up of IFIP members, and we have some founding members in Australia who have been part of the Australian Working Group, is to help support the growth of membership in IFIP, to help support how we can grow better Indigenous philanthropy and better Indigenous giving in Australia. But it's also to identify what are the barriers and how can IFIP support members and build their own awareness of giving in Australia to Indigenous-led and controlled organisations. At the same time, from what we learn from an Australian context through the Australian Working Group, that regional context in Australia can also then benefit IFIP on a global outlook as well. So taking our regional knowledge in Australia and feeding that up into a global context, which is the work that IFIP does globally.
Being part of the philanthropy ecosystem, a lot of the conversations that we are in are about moving more general support or core funding to be it grassroots organizations, but really to move the funding to organizations that understand best how to approach solutions in their communities, but also can work in a way that is prioritizing the needs of their communities. I think in the context of the work that we're doing as a global network, it's opening up conversations. And we see the importance of growing the membership, and not only about it growing in terms of numbers, but it's really about in terms of foundations and new members that are really wanting and invested in understanding Indigenous philanthropy, but particularly the 5 R's of Indigenous philanthropy and how their philanthropy support a paradigm shift in how funding can happen to First Nations communities. And in terms of what's next for IFIP, we're very fortunate to be in a position to have now 8 staff, soon to be 10. And IFIP is on its second year, entering its second year of the implementation of a strategy. So what's next to IFIP, or IFIP, is really taking this all in, sitting with it, and then really kind of carving a plan that it's based on the input that we have heard in this space, so that we can continue to do this work in a way that it's informed and that it's responding to on the ground actual kind of priorities and needs and aspirations.